I'm Jerry Brummer. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the history of Crook County and my own personal history. I was raised on a small ranch, born on a small ranch above Post. Lived there till I was approximately 26, 7 years old. I had the luxury of going to a one-room schoolhouse, the schoolhouse at Post, till I was in the third grade. Halfway through the third grade year, they did away with the school. I started coming to school in Prineville, riding the bus 35 miles, kind of unheard of today. But I think that's one of the changes in Crook County. We had a lot of rural schools back in the beginning. Over time, the schools were really consolidated. Now the majority of them all come to town to school. One of the other things that I remember when I was young, till about 1951 or 52, we didn't have electricity. So I can remember the days of the pitcher pump in the outhouses. The electricity, when it came to the upper country, it actually opened up a lot of venues for the ranchers up there with irrigation and stuff. Prior to that, all the irrigating was done out of ditches. You had to be probably within a quarter of a mile of the river. So that's one of the big changes that we've seen in Crook County over the years. Probably another thing that's very important is the fact that we put up loose hay for years. It was probably the middle 50s before we started using balers. So all the hay was put up loose. When that was done that way, you didn't move the hay to the cattle, you moved the cattle to the hay. So that was quite a change when people could bale hay and they could actually move the hay to the cattle. It kind of changed the way we did things. But prior to that, 1908, I believe, was the year the water came to the Powell Butte area. And the fact that water came out to Powell Butte, there was only 2 springs out there, so there wasn't a lot of homesteads out there. Everybody had to get their water from one of the springs out there. So once the irrigation came in, it really changed the livelihood of that community. Plus the fact they put in cisterns, and when they'd run the water for irrigation, even stock water during the wintertime, they'd fill up their cisterns and it gave them drinking water. So it made a lot of homes in different places out there, Powell Butte, and definitely changed the economy of Crook County. And then when the electricity came in, that also made a lot more ground available for irrigation because you could pump the water, and I'm not just sure the acreage on that. The Ochico Reservoir was put in 1917 or 18, was when it was first established, so there was a lot of ground around Prineville that had been dry land, and that made a lot of ground. I think there was approximately 8,000 acres that became irrigated through that project. The Bowman Dam was completed in 1961, which backed up the water in the Prineville Reservoir, and that also made about another 12,000 acres that was irrigated here in our county. So it really changed the type of farming and agriculture and stuff that we have in the county. When I was young, there was a lot of logging trucks went up and down the road every day. There was 5 mills going here in Prineville, and there was probably, I guess probably 100 loads of logs a day that came through town. It was that way up till about 1985, 1990, and that's when we started seeing the timber production really go downhill. So I was very involved with the timber industry for the first 25 years of my career, a little bit of it in the logging and the rest of it in the sawmills. Unfortunately, over the years with the spotted owl and different environmental impacts and stuff, we don't even have a mill in Prineville anymore. So that's kind of sad. For me, that's one of the things as a county commissioner that I'm going to be working on, is to try to get that back. So I don't know whether we'll be successful or not, but we're definitely going to give it a try. But I think our whole economy, it used to be ag-based and forestry-based, which today we still have the ag base in here, but the forestry base, it doesn't amount to much of our economy. So a lot of our economy is based on tourism. And I know the older folks like myself that's lived here for a long time, we have a hard time accepting the tourism as a backup for the logging the way we remembered it, and the timber. And I think the schools have suffered. I think our road departments will suffer because we got timber receipt monies all these years So the amount of timber, it was based on the amount of timber that was cut. And 75% of that money went to the road department and 25% of it went to the schools. And there was a few years in there in the 70s and 80s when the county was receiving $4 million a year. And it's my understanding this year, for the county, for their part, it's going to be $70,000. A year ago, it was $1.4 million because there was a rural school and road funds that was kind of a payment in lieu of, and it's my understanding that we no longer have that. So the county's going to be challenged with a $1 million deficit in their road department funds. So that's another challenge we're going to have to deal with. So I can't say that I really like what I've seen. We can't stop it. We just got to learn how to live with it and how we're going to expand and how we're going to make the best of what we have left here. I don't think we're ever going to see 5 mills come back. I don't think we probably want to. I think the timber was probably overcut. I think a lot of people would agree with that. But I also think what we're doing today and just letting it all burn up and die, and we're not salvaging any of it, we're not using it, I think that's probably as bad as it was before. So unfortunately the pendulum swings back and forth, and we need to find some spot in the middle that's kind of a sweet spot for everybody, and see if we can't utilize some of our natural resources like we used to, and also try to keep some of these fires at bay that we've been having for the last 15 or 20 years. So it's a changing world. We have to learn to adapt. It's to remember everything the way it was back then, and a lot of the differences we have today. I think probably the irrigation, the water, and the electricity probably changed our county more than any one thing, or the combination of the two. And the fact that we've lost our timber industry the way that we knew it in the past, I don't think it'll ever come back, because to that degree, the type of material we was processing then, we don't do that anymore. We don't use that type of material. So a lot of your moldings, a lot of the material, the lumber was used for moldings and lineal length, long pieces of molding that were clear. Today, this material is made out of finger joint material. Some of it's made out of plastic, some of it's made out of aluminum, and it's a real thin piece of wood that's wrapped around the molding. So the whole industry has changed a lot. But I really hope in the next few years that we can at least get one sawmill back in Prineville, and hopefully get a biomass plant or some way to utilize the biomass, whether it's tortification or actually having a cogen plant. I'm not sure what the best solution to that is, but we need to work on those things and get some manufacturing jobs back in our county. During the heyday of the lumber, the railroad run twice a day. They run 2 shifts, 12-hour shifts, and they were busy 6 days a week getting the materials out of here. Now the railroad really struggles to get enough cars to make it feasible to run the railroad. It's been better the last year or two, and hopefully we can expand on that. The railroad paid a lot of the city taxes here for probably 20 or 25 years, and now it's all they can do to keep their head above water. So that's another thing that we don't have like we did have in the past. So expand a little bit on the ranching side of things. I spoke to it a little bit. We always put up loose hay when I was a young fella, and then the balers came into play. But probably one of the bigger things, everybody had mowing machines in. Of course, in the early days, a lot of the equipment was horse-drawn, and then went to small tractors like 30, 35, 40 horse tractors with mowing machines. And as the evolution happened, then we've got swathers, we have self-propelled balers, we've got all this big equipment. So instead of having a lot of labor that was cheap like we had back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, the automation took over. So instead of having a lot of people to run a lot of different pieces of equipment, you have 1 or 2 big pieces of equipment that one person can operate. So a lot of the labor was discontinued. I know back when I was in high school and even before that, a lot of the kids would haul hay during the summertime, would haul bales or work in the fields and stuff. And then the labor laws changed, And the kids aren't allowed to do that anymore. They have to be 16 before they can even go to work for somebody, and then they're limited to what they can run. They can't be around machinery and stuff. So unless you have a family-owned business or a corporation that your family owns, you're really limited as a young person to what you can do on the ranches. And I think that's kind of sad, because most of the people you talk to that's even my age, they can go back and say, boy, when I was a kid, I remember working on the ranches and all the good food we had and stuff. So it was a really enjoyable time in their life, and something that they really remembered. So there's been a lot of things change over the years. We had a period of time, there was a lot of potatoes raised here. Over the years, probably in the 50s and 60s was the heyday of the potatoes. They'd actually let the kids out of school in the fall of the year to pick potatoes. That's unheard of today, but that was just kind of normal back in the 50s and 60s. And then a lot of your cash crops like your mint, your sugar beets, carrot seed, garlic. There's been a lot of different cash crops that's been tried to raise here over the years. It used to be years ago, it was probably all either grain or alfalfa or grass. So we've got a lot of different products that are being raised here. Unfortunately, in Crook County, we have about 100 days a year that are frost-free, but they're not always consecutive. So it really limits you to what you can raise. So the diversification has happened, nothing like it does down the Willamette Valley or different places where you have a lot longer growing season. But every, so many years there'll be a new product that'll come along, or people will experiment with it and see what they can do with it, make it grow and be successful with it. And to expand a little bit on the logging and sawmilling side, the sawmilling actually started in Crook County probably back as early as 1870 or 80. My family had portable sawmills up in the Allen Creek area and the Grizzly area north of town. These were just little mills that probably employed 6 or 8 people, and they were moved. At that time, you did not haul the logs to the mill, you took the mill to the timber. So they would go into a certain area, buy the timber, and they would harvest the timber, and then once when they got to where they was getting logs for a mile or so to the mill, well, then they'd move the mill and they'd cut some more timber. So the process there changed over the years. So you didn't have all these little mills in different areas. They were consolidated here in Prineville, and then the logs were hauled to the mills. The mills had mill ponds, and they had a brow log, what was called a brow log, and that's how they unloaded the logs off the log trucks. They had cheese blocks, they let a bunk down, and they just roll these logs into the mill pond. And the mill pond served a couple of purposes. It cleaned the logs up on the outside, got rid of a lot of the dirt and rocks and stuff. Also during the wintertime, it got rid of the frost. So it made the logs a lot easier to cut. When you had frost in a log, you got a lot of snaky lumber, and it degraded your lumber. Your logs would go through a mill, it'd go through a debarker. The bark would come off of it. The bark that came off of it would be used for hog fuel to run the boilers, create the steam that was used to dry kill the lumber when it came out, and also to help operate the mill. So even though it was a byproduct, it was a very important product in the operation. The logs would continue into the mill, and they'd be loaded on what we called a head rig or a carriage, and that was the first saw in line in the mill. So you'd cut some jacket boards off, which was your boards on the outside. That's where all your grade was at, your molding grade, your C-Select, your shop lumber. And then as you got into the middle of your logs, you got into some vertical grain or your common grades or dimension lumber. So typically the lumber would come off of there. Once you could count it, it would go to a resaw, which is just what it says it is. It would resaw the lumber either once or twice, sometimes 3 times, go in a circle and come back. And then after that was done, it would go to an edger. So an edger obviously just edges the boards and makes a square board out of a piece of slab wood that wasn't square. Then it goes across the trimmer, which the trimmer would cut it back to length, whether it was 16 feet or 14 feet. They was always in even numbered lengths, 12, 14, 16, 18 feet, especially on this side of the mountain. Most of the lumber that was cut here was pine. There was some fir lumber cut, and your fir is all for dimension lumber, which is for construction. like your 2x4s, 2x6s, 2x8s. So whenever you cut the fir, it all went into dimension, but when you cut your pine lumber, you got the grade out of it. Years ago, we had what we called a green chain. So the lumber, after it went through this whole process, came out on a chain, and you'd say you'd pull a green chain. Well, you didn't pull the chain. You pulled the lumber off the chain and stacked it. And then we had carriers, and they were a straddle buggy. And they would, this lumber would be stacked on carrier blocks, and then the carriers would come up and pick the lumber when they get a unit, and then it would take it to the dry kilns, and the lumber would be dried. And then once it come out of the dry kilns, it would go through the planer. And then once it went through the planer, you had a finished product that would be loaded on the cars. Years ago, a lot of these cars were loaded by hand. And then a lot of them, of course, later on was loaded on the railroad cars, and then probably the last 20 years of the mills, it got to where more of them was loaded on trucks, because the trucks could go from here clear across the United States in 3 or 4 days, where the lumber cars would take 2 to 3 weeks to get back there. So a lot of things changed over the years in this process. In about 1970 or 71, we had a lot of wigwam burners. They were just a big burner, and that's what they were, and all the byproducts, your trim ends, your trimming off the edger, your bark, everything would go into the burners. Anything that you couldn't utilize would go into the burners, and it was just burned up. And DEQ, it was either 1970 or 71, said we can't have all that smoke pollution. So at that time, chippers were put in. So all this byproduct was then chipped and went into chip cars, and the chip pulp went to a Longview Fiber or some other plant here. Longview happened to be the closest one here, or Wallula, Washington. And then it would be made into cardboard or paper or whatever. So the burners went out of business. There are still a few of them left in Central Oregon. You can see the remains of them, but it was about 1970 when we quit using them. So it doesn't seem like it, but that's been close to 50 years ago now. And I know all the mill owners at that time thought that was going to break them. It probably ended up being one of the best things that ever happened, because they ended up with another product they could sell. So unlike a lot of other things, we don't like to see change. So we think at first it isn't going to work, but a lot of times 10 or 15 years later, we have to look back and say that was probably the best thing that ever happened to us. So I worked in the timber industry and ranched on the side from 1967 till 1992. And the Pine Products, the mill that I'd worked at for 23 years, shut down. And I went to work for the City of Prineville. I just went to work for the City of Prineville. I was just a grunt. When I went to work for them, did a lot of the street sweeping and kind of did what nobody else wanted to do. Over the years, I worked my way up, and at the end, when I retired in 2012, I was the Public Works Director. One of the big changes that I seen during this period of time was the growth in the community. When I first went to work for the city, we probably had 2,500, maybe 2,600 hookups. We'd call water and sewer hookups in the city. When I quit, we had over 4,000. So in that period of time, we seen a growth spurt of probably a third more people. The city really wasn't geared up to take care of that. We didn't have enough personnel. We didn't have standard and specs in place. So anyways, we really got an education during this period of time. Got a lot of things implemented. I don't think probably Prineville was any different than Bend or Redmond. It was just Prineville was the last one to get this big growth spurt. But I know in about 2005 or 6, we had a little over 200 new homes that year that was built, and a typical year prior to that was about 10 to 15. So we really had a lot of catching up to do and get ahead of the curve. A lot of growth. It was really hard for us to keep up with, but we got through it. The meters were all read by hand. The water meters were all read by hand. You had to open the meter boxes and read each meter. Today, and actually by the time I left, probably half of them were electronically read with wands. You could go by and stick the wand on the meter box. And now they've even updated them more since I've left. They can their computer, they have an antenna on them, and you can just drive up and down the road with your computer and get the reads off of it. So that eliminated probably a week's worth of work for about 3 employees reading meters, and now 1 or 2 employees can do it in a couple of days. and get it done. So that's one of the big changes we've seen. Of course, with growth, you see a lot of changes. We had to rebuild the sewer plant or expand the sewer plant a couple of different times. When I got ready to retire, I was fortunate enough to spend the last 2 or 3 years before I retired working on a wetland project. And prior to that project, the city had been told that they'd have to go to a complete mechanical treatment plant, and it was going to cost the residents of Prineville about $60 million. And there was no way the residents could afford that much money. So Eric Klon and I decided to do some research and figure out a different way that we could do this. So the city owned 500 acres down west of Prineville, about 2 or 3 miles, and we'd take the effluent and land apply it on pasture land down there. So we did some checking, and Ladd Marsh and LeGrand had went to a wetland type treatment system. So we went over and started visiting with those folks. And during the years while we came up with the wetland process to take care of the effluent for the city of Prineville. And when I left, the design was done on it when I left, when I retired. And Eric spent a lot of time getting funding for it, and it ended up being a $7.5 million project, and the city got about $3.5 million worth of grants. So what was going to be a $60 million project for the city ended up costing the residents of the city about $4 million. And this is enough capacity to at least last Prineville till it gets to 30 or 35,000 people. So it can basically triple in size and still have the capacity to do it. One of the really interesting things about this, there's a lot of education value to it. The school districts, there are 16 kiosks in the school district, the different classes. Will each be responsible for a kiosk, and it'll tell about the wetland process, it'll tell about birds, it'll tell about the flora that's there, how it all works and why it works, and it's an indirect discharge to the river. So one of the reasons we were successful in getting the grants, salmon were reintroduced into Ojico Creek and Crooked River back about 2003 or 4. And so the cool water, the salmon need the cool water to survive. So by doing what we did with that wetland deal, it's an indirect discharge back into Crooked River. So that water going back into the river will go in there at like 52 to 54 degrees, which is really helpful for the salmon. So that was one of the big things that I got to work on when I worked for the city. I retired from the city in 2012. I did a little bit of contract work back for them. I GPSed all the infrastructure, which is an electronic database of all the city's infrastructure, valves, hydrants, manholes and stuff. And I worked a week a month for 4 years getting that done, and I finally got that completed. Decided to run for county commissioner and was successful. So the 2nd of January, I was sworn in as a county commissioner, 2017. And so I'm about 3.5 months into that right now. It's quite a learning curve for me, but anyways, there's a lot of projects. We have a new jail that we're going to build. There was a $10 million bond approved last November, so we're going to be building a new jail here in Crook County. We've got a big expansion of the airport for a helipad up there, and some buildings for the Forest Service up there. That's like an $8 million project. So we have a lot of things taking place here in the county right now. And I'm fortunate enough that I get to be involved with it and be part of it. So hopefully we'll work on the natural resource. We'll get to utilize some more of them and just see what the future brings for the county. So.